Hi, we're talking today with Ian Jenks, who's CEO of SmartKem, a very interesting company in the displays and other electronics field. We'll come to that later. And the reason for doing this is because our panelists in the CEO forum have really got interesting backgrounds. And we wanted to give them a bit more of a chance to explain that because we thought you'd be interested, rather than the simple introductions at the forum itself. So hello, Ian, again.
Oh, hi, Bob. Great to have this opportunity.
Yeah. When we spoke before, you explained that you started off as a technologist, I think in aeronautics, wasn't it? You were educated, but clearly the arc of your career has been in business and in management. So can you kind of guide us through how that happened?
Sure, delighted to. You're right. My degree is in aeronautical engineering, and that actually was the last throes of my dreams to be an astronaut. And unless Elon invites me up in his spaceship, clearly I'm not going to realize that dream. But there is time. I did an engineering degree because I loved understanding how things worked, and I started life actually in the automotive industry, and moved quite swiftly then on into a consulting role, teaching people how to make things with a company called Ingersoll in America. And I found myself, and that was now 30 years ago, and since then I've actually run public and VC-backed companies on both sides of the Atlantic. I actually founded my first startup in the 80s. That's making a new type of light engines for mass spectrometers with Perkin-Elmer. And that's when I sort of fell in love with photons. The very first time I twiddled a mirror and a laser beam came out, and it happened to be a green one at that time, life got very interesting for me, and it was just the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I've been a photon junkie ever since.
I like that phrase.
Yeah, and absolutely true. I have. I sold that to a company on the West Coast called Uniphase, and it was a very small company at the time, and then moved over to Silicon Valley as their president. I think the chairman and CEO of the group at the time said, "Yeah, we like you, but we don't like you enough to let you go. So you have to come over here." I spent the next 4 years in Silicon Valley, and we grew that from, I think, around 80 million to roughly $1 billion in revenues, and a market cap from a few hundred million to, I think, something like $16 billion. And it was a wild time in the markets. We were doing an acquisition or more every quarter, doubling in size every year. And we eventually merged with a company called JDS to become JDSU. And that was one of the world leaders in the supply of telecommunications components. After that, I was chairman at Uplink Communications, another photonics-based business. Took them public on NASDAQ, again, a multi-billion-dollar market cap. And then most recently, sitting on the board as the senior independent director, working with a payments processing business called PaySafe, and their very inspirational CEO, Joel Leonov. We took those through a number of mergers and acquisitions, from the AIM market to the FTSE market in London, and we sold it a couple of years ago to Blackstone CVC for about $4 billion. Somewhere in amongst all of that, I spent 7 years as a partner actually on a West Coast venture capital fund called Crescendo Ventures, about $1 billion under management. And I served on or chaired over 30 startups. We generated over $2 billion in exits. But in all that time, I think what I'm most proud of is I've been fortunate enough to bring a couple of technology products to the market that have changed the world. Now, in biotech, we pioneered the use of blue lasers in a process called flow cytometry. That's a precursor for being able to do gene sequencing. We were there at the early stages of the Human Genome Project. Very exciting stuff. And in telecommunications, we pioneered the manufacture of infrared lasers in optical transmission in the and amplification in the use of fiber amplifiers, and that enabled the fiber optic telecommunications revolution. So, today, at SmartKem, we're taking organic thin film transistors to the market, and I believe that will also change the world. We've invested $37 million and taken 10 years to develop a transistor that can be made at large area scale on low-cost plastic using existing manufacturing infrastructure. It's protected by strong IP. It can be made, used to make flexible displays, mini LED backlights, fingerprint sensors for cell phones, and low-cost logic device. And the subject of our broader discussion later is, of course, about building businesses, raising funds and exits. And SmartKem's actually just completing that journey to the public markets, where we're raising an extra $25 million. So in a lightning flash through what's been a tremendously exciting and very passionate, I hate to say this, more than 30 years in industry, that's me in a nutshell.
Excellent. I'm going to pick you up again on the technology question. But
Sure.
Just before we do that, you made an interesting switch from raising money to providing money to people, and then back into full-time raising money again. So what were the pros and cons of those two different points of view to a very critical part of startups and ventures?
Yes. So I started my career actually learning how to run a business. And that was in the automotive business. And the automotive business, of course, has, where 1 cent on a manufacturing line counts, is a great place to learn how to make things. It's a great place to learn how to run things. They have and to learn that businesses do need processes, they do need people, they need to have people who are trained, motivated, and it's a really great place to learn how to run a business. And then actually doing my own startup, of course, having to raise the funds to do that. And actually I was really lucky because somewhere in amongst there, I'd done a management buyout, I'd learned how to run a business. I thought I'd have a go, did a little bit of an MBA, a bit of a spin out from a tech company, MBO rather, and a bit of a spin out from a tech company. And so I actually had my own funds. I actually funded it myself. So I funded my first startup without the need to go and raise funds. And then at Uniphase, I actually learned for the first time how to raise money in the public markets. So with numerous secondary offerings, having to sell that story of, and we had an exciting story, but the story changed on a regular basis. And I learned really that raising money is all about telling the story. And that story has to be both inspirational and credible. And yes, you need to have the right people to run the business, but raising money is about having an inspirational story. And so when I moved from that side of the equation to being a provider of capital as a partner in the venture capital fund, I learned to listen to the story. And so I was much more interested in two things. One was the people. We've talked before. It's all about the people. And you've had my litmus test. Do they bore you for death at dinner with and talk about nothing other than the business they're in? It's a good test, but you have to learn to listen. And so, but can they tell the story? Can they tell the story, and is that story credible? And I think they're learning, how to interpret what people are saying to you, and to cut quite quickly to the chase. And then once you've actually made the investment, if you got it wrong, to put your hand up pretty darn quickly and say you got it wrong, and kill things that aren't going to be successful early and back the ones that are going to win later. So it's kind of the same thing, just from the other side. It's learning how to tell the story on the one side and learning how to listen to the story, on the other side. And now I'm back to actually having to tell my own startup story, which is actually quite exciting. And so chairing a number of startups over the last couple of decades, but still doing the public company stuff. It's all about the story.
So the story for the industry at the moment is really going back to your technology point about how things are really exciting from a technology point of view. I think I mentioned I was at a conference so probably 10 years ago when OLED looked as though it may never happen. It was very difficult, very complicated. Arguably OLED happened precisely because it's difficult and complicated, but that's another story. And it looked as though LCD was going to be everything, from the tiniest from the micro displays to the biggest displays, or certainly to 120 inch. But that doesn't look like that anymore. OLEDs are there in TVs and growing. They're taking over smartphones. They're appearing in IT. There are all sorts of other technologies. So do your organic transistors play into that diversity? And we haven't mentioned it, mini LEDs, micro LEDs.
Yeah. So you are absolutely right. It's a bit like going back to that famous Victorian, who once said, everything that's needs to be invented has been invented. And there was a time, and it's not that many years, 20 years ago in the display industry, really, that we all thought LCD was it and we'd never need anything else. The trouble with that, of course, is we've all got a calibrated eyeball. And all of us are experts when it comes to looking at a screen. And we can all see colors, nearly all of us. We can all see colors. We can all see brightness. We all can look at how our mobile phone works in sunlight or doesn't. And we can all go, that one's better. And yes, you can fool our eyes to some extent, but we're all pretty expert at being at looking at what a quality display looks like. And OLED is, it was transformational in terms of the color gamut that we could all look at. We all looked at it and we went, wow, isn't that great? And as time has gone on and some of the manufacturing issues have been solved and some of the high value markets where you only actually need a small display, like in the mobile phone world, life's got pretty interesting pretty quickly, and and we think OLED's taken a large chunk of the market, but let's not forget, OLED is still only 35% of the market. LCD still continues to dominate, and whilst I think for a while people were surrendering that space to what they believed would be the inevitable encroachment of the OLED market into the rest of the industry. I think what people are now going, oh, wait a second. It's not quite like that, is it? OLED isn't driving down the cost curve in the way that we all thought it was going to. We all thought it was going to be as cheap as LCD. The manufacturing yields aren't where they need to be. And the micro LED is, well, it's kind of interesting, but it's not mainstream. And it's going to be, I think most people were thinking maybe this year, but I think it's, in my honest view, it's 3 to 5 years away. And there are other technologies, quantum dots that are floating out there, and OLED's fighting back. LCD is fighting back with the advent of the mini LED, and changing the the dumb light bulb, which originally was a fluorescent tube, which moved on to being LEDs, to now going, well, if you distribute the LED over the back of your LCD, is there a way of making the contrast greater on the screen, the brightness better? And it turns out there is. And you've just seen a rash of Gen 1 passive matrix LEDs being announced. Apple's announced one, and even the OLED. The OLED promoters who would, 2 years ago, were saying they would never make another LCD, are going, well, yeah. So we've got the very big companies in Samsung and LG announcing mini LED backlight LCD displays. So I've never seen this sort of change in my lifetime happening within the within this space. And as you go to needing higher currents or stable currents to drive certainly LEDs, there's a real opportunity for a different sort of transistor. You can make the transistors at large scale using 3 technologies today. You can use amorphous silicon, IXO, and LTPS. Amorphous silicon doesn't have the performance you need, and IXO and LTPS are either too expensive, or you actually need to have combinations of them in order to get your drive and your select transistors working in a way that is effective. And so so if you have an LTPS where you put an oxide layer on top of it, that's just compounding the cost problem in the long term. So at SmartKem, we've developed a semiconductor material, and that enables us to make a wide range of different transistors. We can make them on amorphous silicon lines, so we don't have to build new infrastructure. We can make them at very low temperatures, so we can make them at 80 degrees centigrade, so we don't need high-cost plastics. So we can make them at very, very low-cost plastics. So we can make them very inexpensively. And we think that with some of the demonstrations that we're actually giving at this show, where we'll be demonstrating backlights with 80,000, I think 85,000 nits today of brightness, which will translate into thousands of nits of brightness through an LCD, given all the losses, that can be made by the square yard if you want them to be. We think that might get some interest. I think.
Well, I think so. I think I think there's nothing like high performance at low cost on existing production lines. Those are pretty compelling arguments, I think.
I think they are, but we don't underestimate.
You've got the hang of the story, Ian.
Absolutely. What we don't underestimate is how difficult it is to get from here to there.
Absolutely.
It's a long and hard journey, but there is time. And then as the market moves, as I think it inexorably will, to micro LEDs, I do see that as being the next wave beyond where we are today. Everything will have a place, but micro LEDs, I'm a passionate believer in. They are going to need very low cost transistors at a smaller scale. And we believe that we have a compelling technology that will go along that roadmap. So yeah,
I can see why you're still excited.
Yeah.
And as I say, you certainly got the hang of telling a story there. So thanks very much, Ian. Appreciate your time today, and look forward to talking to you in the main CEO forum itself with the others. What a great panel we've got this year.
I think we have a great panel. I'm very excited by the stories of the others as well, and we're all, I know, delighted to have been invited, Bob, and say thank you and SID for doing so.
Thanks very much. Bye.